does happen, what has happened over the last 10 to 15 years in Mississippi, because I've been watching midwifery as a culture across our nation. This is not 1825. This is 2011 now. Credentials are what happens. Everybody's got to have their ABCs. You know, that's just what we've got to do. Not only, I mean, I know some of you are renegades like myself, and that rubs you wrong. However, that's what the world that we exist in has to have. You know, we were making the joke that if you fix an elevator, you know, you have to be certified to fix an elevator. So, having a baby is a little bit more important than that, I think. Well, I guess, unless you're in a falling elevator. Yes. State by state, the norm has jumped in, spent millions of dollars formulating their process to cover lots of different routes. The non-medical midwife, the medical midwife can get in on the game too, but there's direct entry, there's schools, there's ways to prove education and skills experience. And the primary goal for that was to protect the public. And like these ladies were saying, that's what basically your legislatures are going to come back on us with, is we're here to protect the public. Now, all of us in midwifery know that's not the intent of last year's bill, but that's what they said anyway. So what we've got to do is come back with the fact that no, it's not going to eliminate bad outcomes occasionally. It's not going to do that. I mean, babies do die, unfortunately, occasionally. Sometimes mommies do, hospital or home. It's not ever going to eliminate bad outcomes completely. But we do want the public to be able to recognize that they've got a skilled caregiver, because we do live in a very transient culture. We have midwives that actually bump from state to state. When they get ran out of one, they come to another one. And there's a bad trend of that across our country. And those midwives, unfortunately, came into Mississippi last year. That's where our flat came from, with some bad outcomes. Homework last year was to grab 3 states, read their bills, pick out what's good, what's workable. Fortunately, I'm old enough to have been around when Louisiana went legal. One misuse of a term can cut your throat. And you can spend the next 20 years trying to get that out of the law, which is what Louisiana's been doing. We also created a bunch of regulations. But one of the things that we're trying to follow suit with is the fact that we want to do what some of the other states are now doing. All these are guidelines, all these are regulations, but we want to epitomize it with one big thing: a parent's right to choose. A parent's right to look at a midwife and say, yes, I realize I have a breech, but I still accept all the risks, and I still want to have my breech at home. Or that I'm a VBAC, or that I have hypertension, based on what that mother's okay with and what that midwife is comfortable doing. We want the parents ultimately to be able to make that choice, which is what most women do anyway, even in a culture where a lot of people don't. That's what most of our homebirth candidates do. You can look over this bill if you want to just look through it, just real briefly. It's got a lot of things that will allow for an initiation period to grandmother in some of the existing midwives in the state with minimal requirements, and it will give them 2 years to meet the requirements for NARM. If you don't know, NARM stands for North American Registry of Midwives. They're our national credentialing agency. There's 5 different routes to get your CPM. So NARM has made it where everybody can do it, whether there's a school next to you or there's not. So they've made ways for people to do it by correspondence, by apprenticeship, by college entry. But it gives the beginning midwife that doesn't have that 2 years to practice, during which time she can get her birth and go through the NARM route. After 2 years, that won't be allowed anymore. And that honestly is very favorable. There is an exemption in this law to cover women in a church or in a faith or in a culture that are serving women only within their culture, not presenting themselves to the public as a midwife. Whether or not, and when you read this bill, and I laugh because I didn't fall off the potato wagon yesterday. I've been in 3 states when they went legal, okay? Or they go legal or not. This is what we're giving them. This probably is not what's going to pass per letter, but this is our dream bill, okay? If we could have it the way we want it, this is what we would have. And that's where you start with any bill. Now, that doesn't mean that when it goes into committee this coming week that it won't get slammed or whittled away. But we're hoping we made this grassroots simple enough that they won't totally kill it in ways that we don't want them to. And that's one of the things we've got to watch. To committee and to hearing, I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but you won't get any kind of notice. I mean, you'll be lucky if you get 24 hours notice. Enough time to drive out. You really will. Last year, we didn't get any notice. when it went from place to place. And when they changed the laws back in '90 in Mississippi, we didn't get any notice either. So you don't get a lot of notice. And that means that everybody needs to be able to pick up the phone and get the notice of the day.
And this is why everybody needs to sign up for our newsletter so that we can,
You'll get it.
yeah, so you know, about once a month, but we can also, if something like this comes up, we can send it out more,
Yeah, we will send it out. As soon as we have news, we will send it out.
Yeah.
Within hours.
If you're on our newsletter, then you'll get it. Facebook, you're on that too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we would update everything when
And-
there's news.
And on Big Tent and everything, but that would be, yeah. Well, because you know how it is when you get on Facebook, you don't necessarily check and scroll back for the last 3 weeks, you know, so you may miss something. So being on the newsletter, you get in your inbox, you have to read it before you delete it.
And they send us over to the Department of Health, which is where we really do want to be. That's where midwifery has historically been supervised in the state of Mississippi. So we're hoping that gives us a vote to keep us there. But it is also where most new states that are licensing midwifery are sending their midwives, because we attend out-of-hospital births, we do birth certificates, we handle newborn testing, and those kind of things, which is something that Vital Statistics and the Board of Health does. The Board of Health is going to have a midwifery advisory board under them, and it describes how that is appointed and made up in here, which will be some midwives, consumers, and a physician that will oversee who becomes a midwife, how they're regulated, how they're, disciplined if need be, and how they're supervised. And that hopefully will be self-maintaining, because the biggest thing we laughed last year, which is good because it's our money they're spending, but if you go sit in on the House or the Senate, the very first question about every bill is how much will it cost us? So if we can keep it where it don't cost them anything, hopefully they won't give us much thought. I will tell you this to encourage you: if we get this bill in and it passes, we will be the second state in the country that passed the bill on the first go-around. And the big shoe-in is in the last 10 years, states are starting to pay for home birth, midwifery births with Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance. Once that starts happening, the government has no choice but to follow suit, because things like Blue Cross Blue Shield and Medicaid are nationwide. So if Louisiana pays Medicaid for home births and midwifery births, Mississippi's kind of pressed, because all their competition does, and Tennessee does, and Florida does, and all these things.
And we can also use that as a thing that would help save the state money, because so many women are having Medicaid paid for births, and home birth is so much more inexpensive than a hospital birth. So that would be something. Not only will it not cost Mississippi very much money for this law, it could potentially save millions of dollars a year.
So
My son was born at home with health being paid for by health insurance and by Medicaid. So if I ever needed to testify about that, I would be willing to do that. Just as an example, I was in Oregon, I wasn't here.
A lot of our representatives and senators are over 45 and 55. And I've been tickled pink to find out how many of them were born at home.
Or their mothers were born at home.
Well, I've had 12 that I've talked to that were born at home themselves. About everything. Tell you all about how their mom had all 12 of them at home, and it was just great. So to them, it just makes no sense to say you can't be born at home, because I was born at home. The biggest hope is that we get this in a way that, like Bianca and Vanessa were saying, makes them realize we want to keep mommy and baby safe. But what the biggest thing I think that's really important, and I don't know if Missy said this or not, somewhere in your conversation, and this is because we have very uneducated representatives and senators in this area, midwifery, not uneducated general, let me clarify that, is that they don't understand that if you make midwifery and midwife illegal, you're going to get complications dropped off at the ER by many midwives. Some midwives won't do that. I, for one, will never do that, and have never done that. But some midwives, in fear of litigation, will drop them off. So you immediately have cost your mother and that baby 30 minutes to an hour of assessment time, which could be disastrous. And if you can impel them with a little bit of the conviction of guilt, that if you make midwifery illegal, you just increase the chance that somebody's going to get hurt, maybe we can make them understand that we don't want mamas being dropped off without that communication. Because in a state where it's legal, even if the doctors don't like you, they are going to listen to your report. You know, why she's bleeding, why she's white instead of pink. You know, why the baby's acting the way he does.
Also, if you make it legal, you're making it safer
just for that same reason, because if it is legal, they will listen to you. If it is legal, you know, you may get a doctor who will back you up and be your consulting physician who wouldn't otherwise if it's not legal. So we're doing it already, and if you make it legal, it will get safer. If you make it illegal, it will get less safe. You know, you've got the power to kind of, you know, the difference is wider than they think. Plus, they don't know that they were making midwifery illegal. They didn't know they were making home birth illegal last time. If you talked to them about the last bill, they said, but we allowed midwives. And we're like, yeah, but those midwives don't deliver at home. They're like, but we're not against home birth. We voted yes on that because it provided for midwives.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah, they didn't know.
One of the things that just clarified, if y'all were watching the newspaper last year when all this happened, which I have found very helpful, because a lot of the legislatures read the newspaper during the time that all that was going on. The Associated Press misquoted stats, big time. They called the vital statistics and got the stats on how many babies died in a certain period of time, and there were like 5 that had died that year. And they took that sentence out, and you know how newspaper people do this. They took that stat out and presented it in the paper, and all the legislatures read that. None of the babies that they reported in that cluster were born at home and died at home that year. And so they actually quoted it.
They were actually born in a birth center?
No, they were born in hospitals and died with nurse midwives. And they applied them to home birthing status.
So they just said midwives, but it was CNMs, which are only in hospitals in Mississippi.
And none of the legislatures got that. Now they did a retraction, you know, which was one of those little 2-line things down at the bottom of page 20.